Good evening, listeners. This is Alex Mercer, and you're tuned to what remains of the signal. If you're hearing my voice right now, it means you're still connected to a thread of information in a moment when threads are snapping everywhere. We are interrupting all scheduled programming. This is not a drill, not an exercise, not speculation. Within the last 90 minutes, confirmation has arrived from multiple independent sources that foreign military forces have landed on United States soil. Not offshore, not intercepted at sea. Landed. Boots on ground. The first reports came in as fragments, coastal radar anomalies, satellite blind spots, garbled distress calls from harbor masters and Coast Guard stations. At first, they were dismissed as sensor errors, cyber interference, misinformation spreading faster than facts. But that window has closed. Radar data corroborated what satellites could no longer see. Civilian eyewitness accounts filled the gaps, multiple coastlines, coordinated timing. This is real, and it is unfolding right now.
Alex, the shift in tone tonight has been unmistakable. Earlier today, listeners were sending in messages about strange naval silhouettes on the horizon. Probably exercises, they said. Others reported low-flying aircraft with no transponders, communications suddenly going dark along the coast. Those messages were brushed aside by officials and even by neighbors. But in the last hour, the messages have changed. People aren't asking if something is happening anymore. They're telling us what they're seeing. A dock worker in Norfolk wrote that the harbor went silent all at once. No radio chatter, no GPS, just shapes moving through fog where there shouldn't have been any. A fisherman off the Gulf Coast said his navigation went dead, and moments later he saw armored vessels closer to shore than he'd ever seen in his life. There's fear in these messages, Alex, but also disbelief. People keep saying the same thing. This can't be happening here.
That disbelief is understandable. The psychological weight of this moment is immense. For generations, conflict was something that happened elsewhere, on screens, in reports, in history books. The continental United States was considered insulated by distance, by oceans, by deterrence. Tonight, that assumption failed. What we know so far is limited but critical. Initial defensive systems were overwhelmed not by brute force alone, but by timing and confusion. Satellite coverage degraded almost simultaneously with radar disruptions. Communications between coastal defense units were delayed or severed. When confirmation finally arrived, it was already too late for the first line of response. This was not a probing action. It was coordinated, deliberate, and fast.
Listeners are trying to process that speed. One message from a woman in Southern California says she was walking her dog near the beach when she heard what she thought were thunderclaps, deep, rolling sounds that didn't match the sky. Then her phone lost signal. When it came back, every app showed conflicting alerts. Another listener in North Carolina described seeing military vehicles moving inland on roads he'd only ever seen used by tourists and delivery trucks. He said people stood on their porches, watching silently, like no one wanted to be the first to say the word invasion out loud. There's a kind of collective hesitation happening, people sensing that once they name it, everything changes.
And everything does change. Within minutes of confirmation, the second phase began. Not on the ground, but in the airwaves. Regular programming was interrupted across television and radio. You may have experienced it yourself. A sudden tone, a screen freezing, audio cutting mid-sentence. The emergency alert system activated nationwide, but what followed was anything but clear. Messages were brief, repetitive, and often contradictory. Some instructed residents to remain indoors. Others advised evacuation from coastal zones without specifying routes or destinations. In several regions, alerts looped endlessly, offering no new information. This isn't coincidence. It's strain. Emergency communication systems are designed for regional crises, not simultaneous multi-front shocks.
The confusion is palpable. We're hearing from listeners who received 3 different instructions within 10 minutes. A family in New Jersey told us they packed their car after an evacuation alert, only to receive a shelter-in-place warning before they even reached the driveway. A college student in Florida said emergency tones cut into a weather report, then into a sports broadcast, then into silence. No follow-up, just the tone echoing in their head. People aren't panicking yet, Alex, but they're freezing. They're waiting for clarity that isn't coming, and that waiting is its own kind of danger.
From a systems perspective, this fragmentation tells us a lot. Authorities are attempting to balance two impossible goals: informing the public and preventing mass panic. When information is incomplete or changing by the minute, messages become vague by necessity. But vagueness breeds fear. Survival depends on interpretation now. So here is what we can say with confidence. If you are in a coastal area, increase situational awareness. Stay indoors unless movement is essential. Secure communication alternatives, battery-powered radios, local channels. Do not rely solely on mobile alerts. Networks are congested and may fail. If you must move, do so deliberately, with a plan, and with awareness of your surroundings.
And remember the human layer here. People are already stepping into roles they never expected. Neighbors knocking on doors to share radios. Someone in Oregon wrote that their entire apartment building gathered in the stairwell because it felt safer to be together than alone with their phones buzzing. Another listener said their elderly parents finally turned off the TV because the alerts were too overwhelming, and instead sat quietly listening to the radio, listening to us. That responsibility weighs heavy, Alex. People aren't just tuning in for information. They're tuning in for reassurance that someone else is witnessing this alongside them.
That's why we're here. This broadcast is not about speculation or fear-mongering. It's about documentation and connection. We will continue to share verified updates as they arrive. We will read listener reports, not as rumors, but as pieces of a larger picture. History is being written in real time tonight. Not by officials alone, but by ordinary people observing, adapting, surviving.
To everyone listening, breathe. Take stock of where you are, who you're with, what resources you have. Talk to your neighbors, conserve power. Stay informed, but don't drown in alerts. The world feels unstable because it is, but you are not alone in it. We are here, listening with you, documenting this moment as it unfolds.
This is Alex Mercer. You are listening to the emergency broadcast that replaced normal life. Stay with us. Stay aware. And above all, stay alive. This is Alex Mercer. If you're still with us, if this frequency is still reaching you through the static and the strain, then you're hearing history as it breaks apart in real time. We are continuing uninterrupted coverage. What we're about to describe is not a single failure, not a momentary lapse, but a cascade, one that unfolded faster than most defense models ever allowed for. Within hours of the first confirmed landings, America's coastal defense systems, naval, aerial, and digital, collapsed. Not degraded, not delayed, collapsed. Analysts are now using language they usually reserve for post-war inquiries, not live broadcasts. Words like pre-positioned, years-long planning, deep penetration. The question is no longer how this happened, but how long it was coming.
Alex, the listeners are feeling that speed in their bones. People who grew up near bases, who trusted the constant presence of jets overhead and ships on the horizon, are writing in with the same stunned refrain. It all went quiet. One message from a retired radar technician describes watching his local defense array go blind in stages. First interference, then silence, then a return signal that didn't match reality. Another listener, a former Navy spouse, said she recognized the pattern immediately. Jamming layered with precision strikes not meant to destroy everything, just enough to paralyze response. She wrote, "It felt like someone knew exactly which nerves to cut."
That description aligns with what military analysts are cautiously confirming. This was not an overwhelming assault designed to test strength. It was a denial strategy, neutralizing command and control, severing communication between units. isolating decision-makers before they could coordinate. Electronic warfare blinded radar. Cyber operations corrupted targeting data. Physical strikes followed, not randomly, but surgically. Airfields rendered unusable without being flattened. Ports blocked without being destroyed. The effect was psychological as much as tactical. Defenders were left unsure whether what they were seeing was real, outdated, or manipulated. In war, hesitation is fatal. Tonight, hesitation was engineered.
And while that paralysis spread along the coast, the consequences rolled inland. We're now receiving confirmed reports that multiple major U.S. cities have been placed under martial law, not hypothetically, not in planning documents, but in lived reality. Armed patrols, curfews enforced at gunpoint, checkpoints appearing overnight where commuters used to sit in traffic. A listener in one coastal metro sent a voice message earlier that we can't play for safety reasons, but I can describe it. Boots on pavement, shouted commands in accented English, the clatter of weapons being raised, and then silence as phones were confiscated. He said the city didn't fall with explosions, it fell with orders.
That distinction matters. Occupation doesn't always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it arrives as procedure. Residents are ordered indoors for their protection. Movement is restricted until stability is restored. Communication devices are seized to prevent misinformation. These phrases are designed to sound temporary, reasonable, even benevolent. But enforcement tells the real story. Resistance, even verbal, is met immediately. Not to punish individuals, but to set examples. Daily life changes overnight. No commuting, no commerce beyond ration lines, no unsupervised gathering. Time itself reorganizes around curfews and patrol schedules.
People are struggling with the intimacy of that loss. One listener said the hardest part wasn't the soldiers. It was realizing her city no longer belonged to its residents. Another described the sound of drones overhead replacing traffic noise and how quickly her children learned not to look out the window when they passed. There's grief in these messages, but also a strange numbness. People adapt faster than they want to admit. They learn which streets are watched, which hours are safer, how to communicate without speaking. Survival becomes a quiet skill set.
And hovering over all of this is a deeper, more destabilizing fear. The silence from leadership. Press briefings have stopped. Official channels repeat outdated statements or go dark entirely. High-ranking officials who were visible yesterday are unreachable today. The question flooding our inbox is the same one being whispered in homes across the country. Who is in charge? In any crisis, authority is as much about presence as power. Tonight, presence is absent.
The absence is loud, Alex. People are reading meaning into every gap. A listener in the Midwest wrote that their governor's office stopped answering calls hours ago. Another said federal emergency websites haven't updated since before the landings. Rumors are filling the vacuum, some hopeful, some terrifying. Coups, captured officials, evacuations gone wrong. We can't verify most of it, and that uncertainty is corrosive. When leadership disappears, imagination rushes in to replace it.
Historically, this is the most dangerous phase of any collapse. Not when bombs fall, but when legitimacy evaporates. Orders only matter if people believe they come from someone who can enforce them and protect those who comply. Right now, citizens are receiving commands from multiple sources, none of them clearly authoritative. This fragmentation doesn't just create fear, it creates risk. People don't know which instructions to follow, so they hedge, delay, or act independently. That's how accidents multiply.
So we need to talk survival, not in the abstract, but in the quiet, practical sense. Listeners in occupied areas, minimize visibility, keep lights low at night, avoid unnecessary movement. If communication devices are being confiscated, consider redundancy. Written notes, agreed meeting points, non-digital signals. For those outside occupied zones, prepare for spillover, supply disruptions, refugees, sudden rule changes. Check on vulnerable neighbors. Share information carefully and verify before acting on it. Panic spreads faster than truth, but calm spreads too, if people model it.
And understand this. The speed of these events suggests long-term planning. Years, not months. That realization is heavy, but it's also clarifying. This didn't happen because of a single failure or a bad day. It happened because systems assumed certain things could never occur and planned accordingly. Tonight, those assumptions died. What replaces them is up to the people still standing, still listening, still thinking.
To everyone hearing us now, your fear is rational, your confusion is shared, but you are not invisible and you are not alone in this moment. This broadcast exists because silence would be worse. We will keep speaking as long as the signal holds, reading your messages, marking time, bearing witness. Even when leadership is missing, even when cities are quiet under force, voices still matter.
This is Alex Mercer, and this is the frequency that refuses to go quiet. Stay with us. Stay alert. And remember, collapse is not just something that happens to structures. It's something people endure. This is Alex Mercer. If you're hearing this, then at least one pocket of the grid is still breathing, still feeding power to the transmitters that keep this frequency alive. Tonight, we're documenting what may be the most quietly terrifying phase so far. Not explosions, not gunfire, but darkness. The shutdown of the national power grid did not arrive like a disaster. It arrived like a decision. Not all at once. Not everywhere. Lights stayed on in some cities while entire regions slipped into permanent night. Engineers now confirm what people suspected almost immediately. This was not damage. This was control. The outages moved with intent. Blocks here, counties there, states fractured internally, not along fault lines, but along priority maps. Industrial zones glowed while residential neighborhoods vanished. Ports stayed lit. Data centers hummed. Government complexes shone like islands in black seas. And once the pattern emerged, people understood something fundamental had changed. Electricity was no longer a public utility. It had become leverage.
The messages coming in are chilling, Alex, because people aren't just describing darkness, they're describing selection. A nurse in Ohio wrote that the hospital stayed powered, but the surrounding neighborhoods went dark and never came back. She said the drive home felt like crossing a border. Another listener in Northern California described watching the hills go black one by one while a corporate campus across the freeway remained fully illuminated, fountains running, lights blazing, security gates humming. He said it wasn't a blackout, it was a sorting. And people feel it emotionally before they understand it technically. Darkness does something primal. Children stop sleeping. Adults stop trusting time. One listener said they no longer know if it's evening or morning unless they check a watch, assuming the battery still works. Another said the dark feels intentional, like a hand over the eyes of entire communities.
From a systems perspective, what we're seeing is unprecedented, but not impossible. Modern grids are automated, segmented, remotely accessible. Engineers are now reporting that manual overrides are being ignored, that commands from local control rooms are rejected by higher-level systems they no longer have access to. In plain terms, the grid is being governed from somewhere else. Darkness isn't a failure state. It's an operational mode. And that matters, because darkness changes behavior. It slows movement. It concentrates people indoors. It increases dependence. When you can't refrigerate food, can't charge devices, can't pump fuel, you begin making different decisions. Darkness compresses options. It makes compliance feel safer than resistance. As one analyst told us earlier tonight, you don't need soldiers on every corner if you can turn the lights off.
Listeners are adapting, but at a cost. Families reorganizing their lives around daylight. People cooking entire meals when power briefly returns, not knowing if it will ever come back. Communities setting up shared charging stations powered by generators, only to dismantle them when attention grows too intense. A listener from rural Pennsylvania said they've started treating light like a signal flare. Use as little as possible, never consistently, never predictably. Darkness has become camouflage. And there's grief in this too. People talk about losing their evenings, losing music, losing the simple comfort of a lamp in the corner of a room. One message just said, "I didn't realize how much of my peace came from being able to turn on a light."
And as the power grid fractures, something equally critical is being tightened: control of information. We are now confirming widespread seizures and shutdowns of broadcast stations. Some went silent without warning. Others were taken over mid-programming. Emergency tones played, then unfamiliar voices followed, calm, authoritative, unchallengeable. Independent journalists have vanished from the airwaves. Websites freeze, redirect, or quietly rewrite their own archives. This isn't censorship in the old sense. It's replacement. Information isn't just being blocked, it's being reshaped.
People are noticing the changes in language first. A listener in Oregon said the same event is being described with different words depending on the source. Occupation becomes stabilization. Curfew becomes protective containment. Seizure becomes temporary custody. And when words change, meaning follows. Another listener said they watched a news clip repeat from earlier in the day, but with altered captions. Same footage, new story. The most frightening messages are from journalists themselves. Freelancers, local reporters, people who were documenting events until yesterday. One wrote simply, "I was told to stop asking questions or stop broadcasting. I chose to stop broadcasting." We don't know where many of them are now.
When media control tightens, time itself becomes unstable. History starts moving. Past statements vanish. Old articles can't be found. Video links break. And without records, truth becomes negotiable. Whoever controls the narrative controls memory. And memory is what people use to decide what's normal, what's acceptable, what's inevitable. Radio, for now, still slips through cracks. That's why it's dangerous. That's why it matters. That's why you're listening to us instead of a polished statement telling you everything is under control.
Listeners are describing a new kind of loneliness, not physical, but cognitive. They don't know which version of reality their neighbors are receiving. One person said to Tom, "I'm afraid to talk about what I heard because I don't know what they're allowed to hear." That kind of uncertainty fractures communities faster than ideology ever could. People are adapting here too. Sharing information verbally, writing things down, passing notes, using analog methods they haven't touched in decades. Someone said their local library has become an underground exchange, not of books, but of memory. People telling each other what they saw before it disappeared.
Practical guidance matters now more than ever. Diversify how you receive information. Don't rely on a single source, especially one that never changes its tone. Keep physical records. Write dates, times, observations. If something disappears tomorrow, your memory may be the only archive left. And speak carefully. Not everyone is hearing the same world you are. Darkness and silence work together. One limits movement. The other limits thought. Combined, they reshape reality without ever announcing themselves as weapons.
But here's the human constant we keep seeing. People resist erasure instinctively. They remember. They compare notes. They hold on to fragments of truth like heirlooms. One listener wrote, "They can turn off the lights, but they can't make me forget what daylight looked like." That matters more than it sounds.
So tonight, understand this phase for what it is. The grid didn't fail. It was taken. The media didn't collapse. It was curated. Darkness is being used to narrow choices. Information is being used to narrow thought. But as long as voices persist, imperfect, human, unfiltered, control is never absolute. This is Night Signal. We are still here. As long as the power flows somewhere, as long as this frequency breathes, we will keep speaking. Stay aware. Stay skeptical. And if the lights go out where you are, remember that darkness is not the same as silence. This is Alex Mercer. If you're still with us, then you're listening from a place where the rules have already changed, even if no one officially told you when. Tonight, we're moving into the phase of occupation that doesn't rely on firepower. It relies on paperwork, on lists, on numbers assigned to human beings. Forced compliance has begun, and it arrived wrapped in administrative language so clean it almost sounded reasonable. Registration, identification, movement authorization. Phrases that once belonged to airports and government offices now belong to daily life. And the moment people were told to prove who they are in order to exist freely, anonymity quietly died. The new identification requirements didn't appear everywhere at once. They rolled out in zones, pilot programs, temporary measures. People were told to register for their own safety, to reduce confusion, to ensure access to aid. But the forms kept changing. First it was names and addresses, then biometrics, then travel logs, then affiliations. Checkpoints appeared where there had been none. Cameras multiplied. Facial recognition systems activated without announcement. And the message became clear without ever being stated aloud. If you cannot be identified, you cannot be trusted. And if you cannot be trusted, you cannot move.
The fear in the messages we're receiving isn't loud. It's tight, controlled. A listener from Missouri said the registration center felt like a DMV with soldiers. Lines wrapped around buildings, people avoided eye contact. Nobody joked. Nobody complained. They just waited. She said the most terrifying part wasn't the questions. It was how calmly everyone answered them. Another listener from New Jersey described being stopped at a checkpoint while walking their dog. They were polite, efficient. They scanned his ID, logged the time, asked where he was going, and let him pass. He wrote, "Nothing bad happened," and that's what scared me. People are realizing that compliance doesn't feel like surrender at first. It feels like relief. Relief that you're allowed through. Relief that your name didn't trigger anything. Relief that today, at least you still belong.
From a control standpoint, identification systems are devastatingly effective. You don't need mass arrests. You don't need constant force. You just need to know who is where, when, and why. Once movement is logged, behavior changes. People stop wandering, stop gathering, stop helping strangers. Every action becomes a data point. Every deviation becomes a risk calculation. And here's the part no one tells you up front. Once you're registered, you're never unregistered. Even if the rules loosen later, the record remains. Compliance becomes permanent history.
Listeners are already adjusting their lives around this reality. Choosing routes that avoid checkpoints. Carrying documents like talismans. Teaching children to answer questions simply, without emotion. One parent wrote that they practice ID drills the way families once practiced fire drills. Another said they've stopped visiting certain friends, not because they don't trust them, but because being seen together creates a pattern. And then there are the people who don't comply, or can't, or won't.
Which brings us to the disappearances. They didn't announce arrests. There were no public lists, no charges read aloud, just absence. People taken during night checks, at transit points, from workplaces, from apartments where the door closed behind them and never reopened. Families report the same pattern. Uniforms without insignia, vehicles without markings. Calm instructions, no violence, no explanations, just removal. And then silence.
This is where the messages become unbearable to read. A woman from Illinois said her husband was taken after failing to update his registration address. She called every number she could find. No one confirmed custody. No one denied it either. Another listener said their brother vanished after being flagged at a checkpoint for inconsistent travel logs. He texted once, "I'll be home late," and then nothing. Phones go unanswered. Offices redirect. The absence stretches on and families are left suspended between hope and grief. And that suspension is its own form of torture. When someone dies, there is pain, but there is certainty. When someone disappears, every sound becomes a possibility. Every knock becomes unbearable. One listener wrote, "I don't know whether to set a place at the table or pack his clothes away. I'm stuck in between."
Detention without acknowledgement is strategic. It removes people without creating martyrs. It keeps communities guessing. And it teaches a lesson without broadcasting it. Visibility is safety. Silence is survival. Resistance becomes invisible not because it doesn't exist, but because it cannot afford to be seen. And the chilling reality is this: you don't need to disappear many people to change the behavior of millions. Fear scales efficiently.
Children feel this before adults admit it. We're hearing about kids who stop asking questions, who lower their voices instinctively, who memorize which rooms are safe to talk in. One teacher wrote that her students no longer draw pictures of the future. They draw maps of their neighborhoods, marking places they shouldn't go. Another parent said their child asked, "If we follow all the rules, will they still take us?" And there is no answer that doesn't break something inside you.
This is the psychological front of occupation, and it may be the most enduring. Mental health crises are rising sharply. Anxiety disorders, depression, dissociation. People describe feeling unreal, like they're watching their own lives from a distance. Trust erodes first between strangers, then between neighbors, then inside families. Conversations shrink. Eye contact shortens. Silence becomes armor. And here's the cruel paradox. The more people try to protect each other emotionally, the more isolated they become. You don't share fears because you don't want to spread fear. You don't ask questions because questions feel dangerous. And so everyone carries the weight alone.
Listeners talk about losing their sense of self. One wrote, "I used to be outspoken. Now I rehearse every sentence in my head before I speak, even to my spouse." Another said they no longer recognize their own thoughts, only calculations. What can I say? Where can I go? Who might be listening? This isn't living, it's continuous assessment. And yet there are moments of quiet resistance, people checking on each other without asking questions, leaving food anonymously, teaching children to remember songs, stories, jokes, anything not written down. One listener said, "They can track our movements, but they can't catalog our kindness."
That matters. Because occupations don't just seek territory. They seek compliance of the mind. They seek to normalize fear until it feels like common sense. But fear is not wisdom, and silence, while sometimes necessary, is not the same as forgetting who you are. Practical guidance tonight. Protect your mental health as deliberately as your physical safety. Limit exposure to rumor. Create routines where you can. Talk, quietly, carefully, to people you trust. Write things down, even if no one ever reads them. Memory is resistance.
And if you're listening and you feel numb, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means your mind is protecting you the only way it knows how. Survival isn't heroic right now, it's persistent. It's getting through the day without losing yourself entirely.
Forced compliance removes anonymity. Disappearances remove certainty. Psychological pressure removes time, because every moment becomes heavier than the last. But even now, even here, people are still choosing humanity in small, dangerous ways. This is night signal. We're still documenting, still remembering, still speaking the parts that aren't supposed to be said aloud. If you're listening, hold on to who you are. They can track your body. They can number your movements. But your mind, your memory, that still belongs to you. This is Alex Mercer. If you're still hearing us, then you're listening from inside a country that is no longer being conquered by force, but managed by scarcity. Tonight, we're documenting the moment survival stopped being personal and became regulated. Food shortages are no longer rumors. They are systems. They are schedules. They are lines that begin before dawn and end without guarantees. And for the first time in modern American memory, hunger is no longer a failure of logistics. It is a mechanism of control. The supply chains didn't collapse all at once. They thinned. Deliveries became irregular. Certain items vanished permanently, while others appeared briefly, then disappeared again. Grocery stores stayed open long after shelves emptied, because closure would have signaled panic. Instead, lights stayed on, music played, and people wandered aisles that felt like museum exhibits of a former life. Bread behind glass, milk limited by barcode, meat rationed not by weight, but by permission. Then the rations arrived.
Listeners describe ration distribution centers that look nothing like aid and everything like administration. Numbers called. IDS scanned. Boxes handed over without conversation. One listener from Ohio said the food was enough to survive, but not enough to feel human. Powdered calories, nutrient blocks, protein substitutes with no taste and no comfort. She wrote, "It's not starvation, it's compliance disguised as care." Another listener from Arizona said the most disturbing part wasn't the hunger. It was how quickly people adjusted their behavior around it. Conversations shortened, smiles faded. Everyone did the math silently. How long will this last, and what will it cost me if I step out of line?
Hunger is uniquely effective as a control mechanism because it bypasses ideology. You can endure slogans, you can ignore propaganda, but you cannot ignore your body. Ration systems don't need to threaten you. They only need to reward obedience. Access becomes conditional. Miss a registration update, lose a portion, violate curfew, delayed distribution, associate with the wrong people, flagged for review. And here's the strategic brilliance. The occupying force doesn't have to enforce it aggressively. The community enforces it itself. Neighbors monitor neighbors. Families discourage risk. Hunger turns dissent into a luxury few can afford.
Children feel this first. Parents report kids asking why food tastes different now, why there are no snacks, why birthdays don't have cakes. One message from a mother said her child cried not because they were hungry, but because dinner no longer felt like home. Hunger strips ritual before it strips flesh. And yet, beneath the surface, something else is happening, something quieter, something dangerous.
Underground resistance broadcasts have begun to surface. Not everywhere, not constantly, but enough to matter. Shortwave signals, pirate AM, narrowband transmissions that appear for minutes, sometimes seconds, then vanish. No call signs, no names, just voices. Calm, urgent, human. They share information the official channels won't. Which ration centers are compromised? Which routes are safer? How to purify water? How to hide batteries? How to listen without being traced? Each broadcast is a risk. Detection means shutdown, or worse. But the signals keep coming.
We've received transcripts, fragmented recordings. One broadcast from somewhere in the Midwest opened with, "If you're hearing this, you still exist." Another ended with, "Turn your dial 3 clicks left tomorrow night, same time, if we're still here." Listeners describe sitting in dark rooms, radios wrapped in cloth to muffle sound, hearts pounding, not from fear, but recognition. The sound of another human being telling the truth has become intoxicating. One listener said, "I cried when I heard static because it meant someone was still trying."
These broadcasts don't call for violence. That's important. They call for awareness, preservation, memory. They understand something fundamental. You cannot fight what you cannot name. And naming the truth, even briefly, is an act of resistance. From a technical standpoint, these operators are skilled. Frequency hopping, short transmission windows, low power, mobile rigs. They know the risk. they accept it anyway. Because silence is a greater danger than detection.
And while truth flickers on illegal frequencies, something else is being erased in plain sight. American symbols are disappearing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but systematically.
Flags removed for safety. Monuments covered for restoration. Murals painted over. Plaques taken down for review. History textbooks revised. Language softened. Dates omitted. Context removed. What was once celebrated becomes controversial. What was controversial becomes unmentionable. And what is unmentionable eventually ceases to exist. This is not vandalism, it's curation. The goal isn't to provoke outrage, it's to exhaust memory. To make people question whether these symbols ever mattered, whether they were ever real, whether defending them is worth the cost.
Listeners describe driving past empty flagpoles and feeling something collapse inside them. Not anger, grief. One wrote, "It's like someone removed the spine from the country and told us to keep standing." Another said their child asked why the statue in the park was gone. The parent didn't know how to explain it without explaining everything, so they said it was being fixed, and then realized how many lives survival now requires.
Erasing symbols isn't about the past. It's about the future. If you remove shared reference points, you remove unity. People stop thinking in terms of we and start thinking in terms of me. And once that happens, resistance becomes isolated, fragmented, and manageable. History rewritten doesn't announce itself as fiction. It presents itself as correction, as progress, as necessity. And by the time people notice the gaps, they no longer have the language to describe what's missing.
But memory persists in unofficial places, in stories, in songs, in whispered explanations between parents and children, in illegal broadcasts that say names out loud, in the refusal to forget what something once meant. One listener said, "They took down the flag, but they didn't take down what it stood for, not yet."
Food scarcity disciplines the body. Censored history disciplines the mind. And underground broadcasts, fragile, fleeting, are the connective tissue reminding people they are not alone, not crazy, not imagining what they're losing. If you're listening tonight, practical advice. Store food discreetly if you can. Share selectively. Do not advertise abundance. Learn basic radio operation if possible. Even listening is participation now. Teach history orally. Write it down. Hide it if you must. Symbols can be destroyed. Memory is harder to kill.
And remember this, hunger ends. Occupations end. Erasures fail when people remember anyway. The fact that you're listening, that these signals still exist, means the story is not finished.
This is Night Signal. Still broadcasting. Still remembering. Still here. If you hear static after this, don't turn away. That sound means someone else is trying too. This is Alex Mercer. If you're still with us, then you're hearing the sound of a nation no longer certain who is holding the line, or whether a line still exists at all. Tonight, we're documenting one of the most destabilizing developments since the occupation began, the fracturing of the military itself. Not defeat, not victory, confusion, silence, and something far more dangerous than either, uncertainty among those trained to obey. Reports are coming in from every region, units that stopped responding to command hours ago, others receiving orders that directly contradict those given minutes earlier. Some soldiers told to advance, others told to hold, others told to stand down entirely. And in the absence of clarification, men and women trained for structure are left alone with weapons, instincts, and doubt. That combination has consequences no doctrine prepares for.
We've received messages from families who no longer know where their loved ones are, not because they were killed, but because they vanished into the fog of command failure. One listener said her brother's unit was ordered to relocate, then countermanded, then rerouted again within the same hour. Communications failed mid-movement. The last message she received was a text that read, "We don't know who we answer to anymore." That sentence keeps appearing in different forms, from different places, written by different people who all sound exactly the same. Others report seeing uniformed soldiers removing insignia, burning paperwork, refusing orders not out of rebellion but exhaustion. One eyewitness described a checkpoint abandoned without explanation. Vehicles left running, weapons locked inside, no sign of struggle, just absence.
From a structural perspective, this is what happens when centralized command collapses faster than decentralized units can adapt. Militaries rely on clarity, chain of command, legitimacy. When those fracture, discipline doesn't always turn into resistance. It often turns into paralysis. Soldiers are trained to act within rules. When the rules evaporate, action becomes morally hazardous. Some units are fighting on. Some have surrendered. Some have gone dark, choosing survival over allegiance. And others, perhaps the most dangerous, are acting independently, enforcing order as they interpret it. Not because they were told to, but because chaos feels worse than authority, even improvised authority.
One listener from a rural town said a group of soldiers arrived, set up a perimeter, then left 2 days later without explanation. The town didn't know whether they were protected or abandoned. Another message came in from a former officer who said the hardest part wasn't choosing sides. It was realizing the sides no longer existed in any coherent way. "You can't defend a nation," he wrote, "when the nation can't speak to you."
And as confusion spreads through armed forces, something else tightens its grip on civilian life. Surveillance. Not the distant kind, not abstract, immediate, constant, omnipresent. Cameras have multiplied overnight, not just on buildings, but on temporary poles, drones, vehicles. Devices people don't recognize, don't control, don't understand. Some are obvious, others are meant to blend in. Streetlights with new housings, utility boxes with lenses, delivery drones that linger too long to be delivering anything.
Listeners described the sound first, a faint hum overhead at night. Not loud enough to identify, just persistent enough to notice. Drones that don't blink. Cameras that don't move, but somehow feel like they're watching anyway. One listener said her neighborhood stopped using porch lights, not because of blackout orders, but because everyone realized light draws attention. Another said people stopped talking outside entirely. Conversations moved indoors, then into whispers, then into silence. Phones feel heavier now. People carry them like liabilities. Messages are deleted immediately, calls avoided, screens turned face down. One listener said she leaves her phone at home when visiting friends because it feels like bringing a witness she didn't invite.
Technically, this surveillance isn't about omniscience. It's about pressure. The goal isn't to see everything. It's to make you believe you could be seen at any moment. That belief changes behavior faster than enforcement ever could. People self-regulate, self-censor, self-isolate. Privacy, as a concept, doesn't vanish with a law. It vanishes when people stop expecting it, when they stop believing they deserve it. And once that threshold is crossed, surveillance no longer feels invasive. It feels inevitable.
Children are adapting to this faster than adults. Parents report kids asking if the ceiling is listening, if toys have cameras, if teachers can hear them at home. That kind of awareness doesn't fade, it calcifies. A generation growing up under constant observation doesn't learn freedom, it learns avoidance.
Actionable advice if you're listening. Assume all digital devices can be monitored. Limit unnecessary communication. Speak in person when possible. Use written notes sparingly and destroy them after use. This is not paranoia, it's adaptation. Survival now includes information discipline. And as surveillance tightens, another pillar of human life is being quietly dismantled. Faith.
Churches are closing, mosques, synagogues, temples, cultural centers. Some are shuttered under the language of security. Others are repurposed, storage facilities, administrative hubs, temporary housing. Public gatherings are restricted. Prayer becomes regulated. Belief itself becomes suspicious. One listener described walking past a church that had served her family for generations, now guarded and silent. Another said their mosque was converted into a distribution center, prayer rugs stacked in a corner like forgotten artifacts. It wasn't vandalism, he said. It was erasure without anger.
From a control perspective, this makes sense. Faith builds community without permission. It offers meaning beyond authority. It teaches people to endure suffering without surrender. That makes it dangerous to any occupying power. Suppressing faith isn't about theology. It's about preventing unregulated gathering, unmonitored belief, and unapproved hope. When people believe in something larger than the system controlling them, the system loses leverage. So faith moves underground. Services held in basements, prayers whispered in kitchens, songs remembered instead of sung, rituals compressed into gestures. Communities persist quietly, invisibly, resilient not because they are defiant, but because they are human.
Listeners speak of finding comfort in shared silence, in holding hands without words, in teaching children stories instead of doctrines because stories travel better when books are confiscated. One message said, "They can close buildings, but they can't close what we carry."
Military confusion fractures defense. Surveillance fractures trust. Suppression of faith fractures meaning. And yet, through all of this, people are still choosing to remember who they are. If you're listening tonight, protect your mind as carefully as your body. Stay aware, but not consumed. Adapt without surrendering identity. Faith, culture, belief, these are not luxuries. They are anchors. When everything else shifts, they tell you who you were before the world changed.
And to those serving in uniform who may be listening, we see you. Your confusion is not failure. Your hesitation is not weakness. History will remember that you were asked to stand firm while the ground dissolved beneath you.
This is Night Signal, still broadcasting, still bearing witness, still holding space for the human voice in a world that wants silence. If you hear us, you are not alone. And as long as you remember that, neither are we. This is Alex Mercer. If you're listening tonight, you're hearing a country learning how to exist under something it was never supposed to experience for long. Occupation. Not a moment. Not a crisis. A condition. And nowhere is that condition more visible, more quietly devastating, than in the lives of children who are growing up inside it. Schools are no longer places of curiosity. In many regions, they're closed outright. In others, they've reopened under new rules, new oversight, new curricula that feel unfamiliar even to the teachers delivering them. Subjects disappear. History is edited. Language shifts. Maps change. Children are taught what to say, what not to ask, and how to remain unnoticed. The classroom, once a place of imagination, becomes a space of caution. What's most unsettling is how quickly children adapt.
Listeners who are parents keep telling us the same thing, Alex. They adjusted faster than we did. One mother wrote that her son no longer asks why soldiers stand outside the school gate. He just walks past them, eyes down, backpack tight against his chest. Another parent said her daughter practices silence like a skill, correcting herself mid-sentence when she thinks she's said too much. Children learn patterns of danger the way previous generations learned playground rules. Which streets are safe, which uniforms to avoid, which questions get adults in trouble. They stop drawing flags, they stop talking about the future. One listener said her child asked if college still exists or if that was before. That question alone says everything.
Developmentally, children are wired to normalize their environment. What they see repeatedly becomes how the world works. That means an entire generation is forming core memories under surveillance, restriction, and uncertainty. Freedom isn't something they've lost. It's something they've never experienced. And that changes not just behavior, but identity. A child who grows up watched does not rebel by default. They calculate, they observe, they survive. And that survival comes at a cost we won't fully understand for decades.
Teachers who still have contact with us describe classrooms that feel emotionally muted. Fewer questions, less laughter. Kids finish assignments quickly, not because they're engaged, but because they've learned that drawing attention is risky. One teacher said they don't misbehave anymore. They disappear into themselves. And while that silence looks like order, it's something else entirely.
As the days stretch into weeks, and weeks into something heavier, another phenomenon has taken hold of the population. Rumors. Not wild fantasies, but whispers. Fragments. Half sentences passed quietly between people who need something to believe in. Rumors of counteroffensives, of regrouped forces operating beyond the visible map, of allies preparing intervention, of operations so secret they leave no trace except hope. There are no confirmations, no evidence that survives scrutiny, but the rumors persist because people need them to.
We hear them constantly. A listener says they heard armored movement outside the city at night. Another claims a cousin intercepted a transmission suggesting a coordinated push is coming. Someone else swears they saw unfamiliar aircraft moving without lights. Each rumor spreads cautiously, never loudly. People share them the way you might share a fragile object, carefully with disclaimers, afraid of breaking it by speaking too confidently. Hope in this environment is dangerous. It can get people killed if acted on too soon, but it's also necessary. Without it, people stop imagining a future entirely.
Psychologically, rumors serve a purpose. They restore a sense of agency in a situation defined by powerlessness. Even unverified, they remind people that the story may not be finished, that the current state is not the final state. But the danger lies in expectation. When hope becomes prediction, disappointment becomes crushing, and so people learn to hold hope quietly, loosely, enough to breathe, not enough to gamble their lives on.
One listener put it perfectly. She said, I don't need it to be true. I just need it to be possible.
As time passes, the most painful realization settles in, not as panic, but as routine. This occupation may not be temporary. Life begins to reorganize itself around that assumption. Curfews become part of the day's rhythm. Patrol schedules are memorized the way weather once was. People shop quickly, speak less, plan smaller. Ambitions shrink. Dreams are postponed indefinitely. Survival replaces progress.
Listeners describe days that feel repetitive but tense. Wake up, check the street, wait. Move only when necessary. Return home before dark. The world becomes smaller, more contained. People stop asking where they'll be in 5 years. They start asking if tomorrow will look the same as today, and whether that sameness is a blessing or a curse. One message said, I used to plan vacations, now I plan exits. Another said, freedom feels like something I dreamed once.
Long-term occupation doesn't announce itself with a single moment. It creeps in through adaptation. When people stop resisting because resistance feels futile. When compliance becomes muscle memory. When identity is preserved only in private spaces. This is not defeat in the military sense. It's erosion in the human one.
And yet, even here, people find ways to remain themselves. They cook old recipes. They tell stories from before. They teach children songs quietly. They celebrate birthdays with whispers and candles behind covered windows. These acts don't overthrow anything, but they preserve something essential. They say, we were here before this, and we are still here now.
Which brings us to the question no one can answer. The question that hovers over every broadcast, every whispered conversation, every sleepless night. Will this country ever be free again? There is no honest answer we can give you tonight. No timeline, no certainty, no guarantee. Anyone claiming otherwise is either uninformed or lying. Freedom is no longer a date on a calendar. It's an unknown variable.
Listeners ask us this question constantly, some with anger, some with desperation, some so quietly it feels like they're afraid to hear the answer. A man wrote, "I don't need to know when, I just need to know if it's possible." And that's where we are. Not at answers, but at endurance.
This broadcast continues not because we have conclusions, but because silence would mean surrendering the last uncontested space left, the human voice. As long as we speak, as long as we remember, as long as we witness, something remains unoccupied. If you are listening, you are part of that.
Hold on to who you are. Teach your children what mattered before. Protect your mind. Protect your memories. The future may be uncertain, but identity does not have to be erased.
This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still listening, still refusing silence. The question remains unanswered, but the signal continues. Listeners, this is Alex Mercer. Tonight, we've traversed a world reshaped by fear, uncertainty, and unrelenting change. We've heard the streets fall silent, witnessed children adapting to rules they never asked for, and felt the weight of a question no one can answer. Will freedom ever return? There are no guarantees, there are no certainties, but there is one thing that remains steadfast: our ability to observe, to remember, to speak, and to endure.
Yes, Alex. And to everyone still listening, know this. Even when the lights are out, the signal's fractured, and the world feels smaller than ever, the human voice persists. Hold on to your neighbors. Protect your knowledge. Preserve your memories. In silence, hope dies, but through awareness, community, and resilience, it survives.
This is Alex Mercer with Sierra Lane. Lost signal radio will go silent for now, but the signal is not gone. It lives in you, in your vigilance, and in the stories you carry forward. Stay alert. Stay connected. Stay human.
And above all, survive.
We'll return when the signal allows. Until then, remember, the night may be long, the occupation may be unrelenting, but humanity endures.